Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Planet Zoo. We're back again in Arcadia and today I'm responding to the other half of our oh, you've just seen an animal escape. What a start! Anyway, I'm responding to the other half of the poll I put out where we were going to kind of decide where we were going to build next, and a lot of you also voted for the campsite build. So that's what we're going to do today. We are going to be building a mixed species habitat once again, this time containing the American bison and the pronghorn antelope. That's our bison escaping as well. So let's get these guys contained and we'll start building our brand new habitat. That's going to be a lot of fun and it's going to be a nice little mix of different build styles. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's jump in. So the first thing we're going to be doing is building a barrier, and because this habitat is slightly sunk into the ground, we're going to make a nice concrete surround that is going to envelop the whole habitat, and this is hopefully going to stop our animals from escaping by jumping up the sides. Now, I'm not too worried about the bison as they don't have a great deal of jumping that they can do, but the pronghorn antelope are certainly pretty spring-heeled, so we're going to need to be aware of that. And I'm just starting by building a structure, and then we're going to attach a fence to it. I want to make these fences and most of the build itself out of some new world pieces. So they're going to be heavily featured in this one as it fits the North American theme, and I think it's just going to be a nice way to transition through our entrance area into this campground without distracting too much as we get to our research center, which you will see in the background. I played around a few different ideas for this one. I ended up using this, but we do actually remove it, and I'll probably put it in certain places where I think it's going to benefit guests by giving them a little bit more shelter. So the eventual actual barrier is simply just the concrete pieces with these steel girders and the basic fence. Now, the steel girders for now are going to stay in place just as a guide for me, but I will eventually be removing most of the pieces on the top so that we've got a nice continuous concrete floor going all the way around. And I can't match the path up perfectly with this due to terrain constraints and stuff, and I don't want the path to stick out, so the guests aren't going to be able to get right up to the edge of this barrier, but that's not too much of a problem. We've not actually had any guests in here to test this yet, so when you actually get to the final tour of the whole place, you're just going to see the animals. And heads up, the tour was a very rainy one, so it's looking pretty nice. And yeah, so we carry on and just match up all of these pieces here, and then I'm not going to bore you with the whole idea of me wrapping this all the way around, so we will just jump ahead. And what we needed to do now was just fill in the corners with concrete slabs and match up this trim work that goes all the way around. Now at the moment you're looking at the entrance from the guest area into the staff zone, and some of the pathing does change a little bit here as well. I really don't like the textures on the staff paths, and I'd prefer to have something a little bit easier on the eye, so I like to try and hide those staff paths as much as possible. And you can see we're just having a little bit of an issue fitting in the concrete, so we just need to change the actual piece that we use. I do like the concrete. They have a nice texture to them, and it doesn't clip too much when you actually have multiple pieces overlapping, which was the case with this build. But it's got this really nice feel to it, and I think it's looking great. We do also surround the entire outside of the path with a forest, so that this is very well kind of merged into our environment. And it was a really exciting build. It was nice to come to this campground area and expand on it, because we've not really touched on it since we put that moose habitat in, as well as obviously the research centre, which I consider a separate entity altogether. So it's actually nice to flesh this area out, have a little bit of a break from the wetlands development, which we will be returning to next week, and just have some nice time playing around with some new animals. The bison I have not actually used at all, and nor have I the antelope, so again it's a new habitat for me. Now as we come round into actually decorating the habitat a bit later on, I do need to inform you that unfortunately the bison's foliage requirements have been exceeded rather substantially. I think they can only take up to about 39% foliage coverage, and we're up to about 56 on this one. So again, it's more of an excuse for me to look into modding once the game is complete and we're not getting any more updates, and I'll remove the habitat requirements for franchise mode animals, because you know how much I like to have my foliage looking really on point and have it well and truly fleshed out and make most of my habitats look pretty overgrown. Although the bison are a grassland animal and they favour large spaces that don't have much in them, when you just use your terrain brush to fill in an area, I'd never think it looks amazing. It never looks very good, unfortunately. Anyway, we take out all of those barriers and then we move into our staff entrance, which, as you can see here, we've actually covered up a lot of the garish staff path that was in. And we're going to come in with some more concrete, as if the barrier itself that wraps around the habitat is being extended. Now, I did have this coming just down, but I changed my mind with that one because, again, animals can still escape using just going through the wall there. So I had to come up with a little bit more of a creative way to have this merge in with the rest of the environment. And it's a pretty simple one. I just continue to extend that wall all the way along, so we get this kind of, what do they call it? It's more like a vacuum, I guess, for staff to be able to enter the habitat safely without the animals escaping. And then we do end up building a little bit of a lean-to on the side here. That'll be predominantly used by our antelope. The bisons don't tend to go into much hard shelter from my experience and what I've seen. After finishing this habitat, they tend to just sleep outside under the stars, which is pretty cool. I mean, they're big herd animals, so I don't imagine them getting a lot of hard shelter in the wild either. So it would be nice to kind of make this look a little bit more of a wild area. And you can see there, they kind of all reset because I do a little bit of adjustment to the water, so they're all kind of stacked up on top of each other at the entrance to the habitat. Now, this is where I have to be honest and say this was quite a difficult part of the build because I wasn't building on a grid of any description and I wasn't building alongside the world axis. So a lot of the movement on these pieces was very tricky and intricate because they kept doing that like weird little listing to the left or right that you get sometimes when you don't build on the grid. But it was okay, we coped with it, it's looking pretty good, and it was just a case of working out how we were going to incorporate the new lean-to for our animals in with this entrance chamber. Obviously, I've not decorated fully in this area as well, so we could be putting in a couple of like staff tools and things, little bins and stuff on this side of the habitat, which would make it look a lot more lived in, I guess. But for now, we're just happy with how this is looking, and it's starting to take shape. We have the basic structure of the habitat in, and we're going to be able to move on to our decorative pieces very soon, once we get this lean-to built. Now, the other hard shelter area I have planned for this is to build a nice new area on the opposite side of the habitat that is going to be kind of like a cave, I guess. I don't want too much in the way of unnatural man-made habitats within here, like buildings and stuff. I've done a lot of builds where we have some sort of staff building in there, and I guess this would function as that. But because this is a large area that's meant to represent some grasslands with a nice stream running through it, I didn't want to put too much man-made property in here to distract from the natural looking environment that we're trying to create. Another thing to bear in mind, the last build that we did had a lot of rock work in it. Now this one has some rock work, but it's more foliage work. So you're going to see quite a lot of foliage development going on in this build, which is exciting because last build we did a lot of rock work, and the build before that we were doing a lot of construction work. So it's nice to go back and do the foliage, so you get the complete package over the last few episodes. So if you are a brand new subscriber and you are kind of getting used to my build style, you're going to see a lot more of that, and you're going to be able to understand how I do things across the board. So my buildings, my foliage and my rock work, and I just thought that was quite a nice way to develop it, which is also the reason why we exceeded the foliage limits massively on this habitat. So I was trying to play around with things there. As you saw, we've got the roof in place now, and these are actually the, I think they're called New World murals, and it's just a wooden framework that I thought worked really well as a roof as well. We then matched up the pillars here with the little overhanging fences that are upside down, duplicated the roof along so it matched up nicely, and then we could start developing a structure for the side that would give it a little bit more stability to it, because at the moment it's not looking too stable. So this involved dragging out this wall piece so that it all matched up nicely, and we then took out those pillars and duplicated the thicker structures of steel girders here that are kind of really strong supporting pillars for the corners of the building at the front, and we just moved that into place so that it was now a complete building. And we could have actually left these open. I hadn't thought of that, this roof section here, but I decided to fill them in with concrete just to make it look a little bit extra sturdy. Obviously it was difficult to get it matched up, but when you're using these panels you do have a lot more creative freedom with them, so you can create these really nice looking side pieces. And I think these were actually angled at the standard Planet Zoo degrees, so we could have just put in the actual 1 meter and 2 meter curved slope, like angled slopes of concrete. But I like to use panels wherever I can because they give you a little bit more creative freedom to fill in those gaps. Now, we're going to work on our next shelter, and this involves using our terrain stamp tool to build a little bit of a structure that we're then going to hollow out to create our cave system, and then we'll start doing some rock work to finish it all off. And I wanted to play around with terrain quite a bit in this because I'm trying to limit the foliage, not too much though. I still want it to be lush and vibrant and have a lot of growth in there. I had to play around with levels and using rocks and the terrain tools to manage the habitat in a little bit more of a creative way, which allowed us to play with like little steps and levels within the terrain that would give it a little bit more variation than just a flat grass texture with a lot of terrain paint on it. I think it's really important because in terms of the terrain, the brushes are amazing, but when you've just got bare painted terrain, it doesn't look too great. So I like to, that's why I use Foliage and Rockwork so much in my builds. It just offers a lot more creative freedom, which when you are playing on franchise mode and you have the constraints that are set by the game that you can't get rid of, as in making sure that your animals' needs are fulfilled and all of their terrain is perfect, it can get very difficult. And I've had habitats in franchise mode where I've had like 1 or 2 trees in there and then suddenly we're at our limit, and I don't like that. So another reason why I've now decided that this is going to be more of an easy mode franchise is so that we can avoid that becoming too much of a problem and getting guest refunds, which you would get on hard mode, because they will complain that the animals aren't looked after because there's too much foliage in there. And if that stacks up with other things that will make them unhappy, they're going to ask for a refund, which we really can't afford. So that's why it's now an easy mode playthrough. It lets me be more creative with my foliage and decoration. So we are now working on our rock work, and it's very much part and parcel the standard stuff that I do. We start with a base layer of rocks, then we run some up the side of our terrain and fill in any holes and gaps within the rocks. And obviously everyone has their own different ways of working, but I really like to show off mine because it's what's comfortable for me. And if you are kind of just getting into Planet Zoo, I would recommend watching any of the other YouTubers that are out there because they all have their different styles and it might help you to find yours. So you can see we've got our basic stuff set down now, and we're going to come in with some smaller rocks to start building things up. Going around the top now, and then it's just a case of once this is all framed in and yeah, we've got everything kind of set up, we can start filling in more of the gaps with some smaller rocks. And I just like to do this because it just saves time really in the long run. If you can get some nice big rocks in and get them matched up nice and neatly, you only have a limited number of rocks to put in to fill in your gaps. And there were some pretty good gaps to fill here. But I really like using some of the smaller ones and just having the random rotation on and just nestling them into position. Everything eventually does snap together real nice, and when you come in to do your foliage decoration, if you've got any imperfections in there, you can slap some foliage in there to finish it all off, and it looks really nice. Now, for this cave system, I had planned on putting in a mine shaft, very much like I did in the Northlands Doll Sheep build from a very long time ago, and I just decided not to bother because as a natural structure I think it looked really nice and it didn't need anything more added to it. Sometimes with Planet Zoo less really is more, and you can have all of these elaborate builds and things, and sometimes I do like to do it that way, but other times there's a beauty to the simplicity of certain things, just using rocks and foliage and not overdoing it all with elaborate set pieces, I guess. That doesn't mean to say that I don't like to get elaborate with my foliage and rockwork, and I mean, as you can see here, we're doing quite a bit of extensive additions to this, making random steps and little pieces jutting out and things, nice rotations, and just making sure all of the textures match up really well. one of the other important things to note is lighting plays a really big part in building within Planet Zoo. So what you'll see here on this side, you can see a lot of the textures are very obvious and visible. Around the back of this structure, they're not so visible. So when you're building, I would always recommend just letting the game proceed a little bit so you can see how a habitat looks at various different times of day, because you'll find something that might not look so great in the morning, suddenly when the light moves around a little bit and the sun has moved across the sky, the beauty of an area is very quickly revealed. Like at the back here, everything looks a little bit flat, but later on it doesn't look so flat at all, and it looks actually very, very well designed in my opinion. But obviously I would say that because I built the thing and I have to be happy with it. So yeah, I did say there wasn't going to be much rock work, but this is a pretty dominant set piece, so we are doing quite a bit here just to make sure that everything sits in nicely. And the idea is our buffalo can't actually, our bison can't actually access this area because the entrance is too shallow for them. But as I've observed, the bison's habitat behaviors, they don't really go into any sleeping areas. They just seem to stay outside, even though their hard shelter requirement is at 100%. So maybe our pronghorn antelope will come in there and rest when it rains or at night, but they've also got this little lean-to here that the bison can actually use, so hopefully they'll go there if they need to. Anyway, you just saw us doing a little bit of terrain painting. Now, I have started, again, with my terrain brush, just keeping it at about 60% because you get a nice merge of the different textures there. So we've got that short grass in, but underneath it, there's a nice, like, slight layer of the mud. And you can see our soil kind of network goes all the way out from the little lean-to into the water area. It goes under the water and comes out on the opposite side. So we've got a really nice little transition there. And then we've got grasses in areas where there should be grass, a little bit of sand, and the riverbed is predominantly heavy soil. Now you can see the gap there in our actual structure that surrounds the habitat, and that's because I want to do a little bit of a water grid, I guess, so that the water from here will go into some sort of underground drainage system or a network of underwater tunnels or something, so it's recycled back round into the zoo or just goes off into nowhere, I guess. It was just a way to finish it all off, and I'd mistakenly left some filters on there, which meant I was going to accidentally put in some unsuitable foliage. Now, while I'm all for doing more foliage than necessary, I really like to make sure that the foliage has the correct biomes and continents for my animals. So we unfortunately can't use any of the fallen tree logs, but we could come back and do some extra bits and pieces of just like random logs that are left here. Again, I don't need to bother too much with set pieces for this build because the foliage and the rockwork is so detailed within it. However, I have considered bringing the American beaver into this area as well, which would involve us putting in a few extra set pieces like I planned to a while ago. I would have liked to have done some sort of, I don't know, maybe a sawmill or something like that, but we're not doing American beavers yet. We are currently focused only on our pronghorn antelope and the bison. And as well, because like I've already mentioned, the bisons are a plains animal, we really want to just make a few set pieces here of foliage and then have the rest of these nice open spaces. I had neglected to put in the few enrichment items I already have unlocked, so we're doing that now as well. The mud pit obviously being a very important one, and I normally hide these, but I thought I would just leave this one as is because I think it looks really nice just sat in there, and we're going to put a little bit of foliage decoration around it, but I don't think it needs to be sunk in and hidden like I normally would with stuff. A few herb scent enrichment markers dotted around, and then balls and feeders and things, and we can then start working a little bit more in depth on our foliage once everything is put into place. But you can see from when we first came into this area, it's really developed already, and it just needs that finishing touch and that je ne sais quoi, shall we say, to really finish it off. So this is where our foliage comes in. And in these larger landscaped areas, foliage is what really makes the difference. And like I said, it's about having these little set pieces thrown in that really make a build stand out. So I'm using a lot of the buffalo grass and in various different phases, dry, parched and the standard, as well as the saltwort and a few other pieces of grass, reeds and extra bits and pieces just to really line the riverbed here very nicely. And this is where you can start to see why we end up going over our foliage limit, because it is thick. I always like to have dense vegetation in my zoos, and I just don't think there's anything that's going to change that unless we get some really nice looking terrain paintbrushes that would add more in, kind of like what you get with Prehistoric Kingdom or Jurassic World Evolution, where it's just a paintbrush almost that you paint trees and stuff into a build with. And obviously I can see the limitations on that, and it's difficult to do in a game like Planet Zoo, but that's why I make my own kind of paintbrushes with foliage and stuff, just to really flesh out a build and bulk it out a lot more. And this is where things start to get really relaxing, just listening to the music and watching the foliage get placed, as you can see the build really starting to take shape now. And I had a lot of fun doing this one. It was really nice to do something a little bit more expansive. I mean, the area here is about 3,000 square meters, and the buffalo and the antelope combined at the moment only require 800. So there is plenty of scope for this herd to develop. And my initial plan is to have the antelopes breed a lot quicker than the bisons. We already have, at the time of the finishing of this recording, we have a baby antelope and a baby bison, which you will see in the tour. But due to various workshop constraints, I could only get one male and one female antelope. So we only have the singular breeding pair there, whereas with the bison, they have one male bull and 4 females. So the bison herd may grow pretty quickly, and our antelopes will need a little bit more attention to ensure that they start breeding a little bit quicker. And I really like the fig trees, so we do have one in already, and I think one's enough because they're pretty unique looking, and they really need to have their own sort of set piece, whereas here is just this overgrown brush, which we're kind of moving and maneuvering around the soil pieces here, but we can put a little bit of parched and dry grass onto the soil so it looks like it's not getting enough attention, and then a few more grasses and things just dotted around, but making sure that those patches of greenery where the short grass is filled in real nice. And this is what I like to do. You can use your terrain paintbrush as a bit of a guide for where you're eventually going to put your foliage, and your soil work will indicate where you're going to put rocks and stuff, and that's just a nice way to set things up, because when they're kind of just texture paints, they don't work so well. So using them as your base coat for the foliage or rocks that are then going to go on top of it is a really cool idea. We're going to put in our bedding in this little cave section, and that unfortunately means our upper section here needs to then be filled in again, and this took some time. I don't like it when this happens, because what basically happens is your bedding will automatically have a area of effect, I guess it's called, that will just remove anything in and around it for the sake of fitting that bedding in. So we had to just quickly put back in the upper level of that build, and then more bedding, and then back to our foliage. And as you can see here, like I've already mentioned, our patches of soil get filled in with drier grasses, and then the greenery gets a little bit of a mix. So we put a bit of the standard grasses in, and then a bit of dry, and where we have a little bit more of a larger expanse of greenery, that's where we can put in some really lush decorative brushwork. Coming back over here, I wanted to just duplicate a swatch of some of the foliage I'd already placed in, because that would save me some time. And obviously we have to adjust it, we have to change the angles of certain pieces, but then it sets in very nicely, and then we can just continue this all the way around the corner of this habitat. Now you can see the path at the top there, that's where our guests are going to be able to go, so it isn't quite flush with the barrier like I've already said, but it's going to give enough that guests will be able to walk around there, and there will be parts where the path goes right up to the barrier, and I imagine that is where I'd end up putting my education boards and stuff. Now, we're about to finish, so I do need to mention that I haven't actually put in any education boards or donation boxes yet, as that's something that's probably going to come at a later date when I go back to these areas and just watch our guests for a little bit. And I'll maybe do those things on a stream so we can spend a little bit of time exploring the zoo, watching our guests' behaviour patterns and looking at those hotspots where they're kind of bunching up to view our animals. And that'll give us a nice area of where we can put our education boards, speakers and donation boxes to maximise the education rating and donations that we're getting in from guests who are coming to visit this area. Just these finishing touches of grasswork on the top of the cave system, and as you can see, it is looking really good. And the last thing I wanted to do was put in some grids here that would resemble water kind of features. So our water will come from that top section of stream there, pulling and flowing over into this little enclosure here, and it's almost like we've created a little bit of a dam, and the water is going to pour out into our new section there. So while this is all being filled in and you're watching these last sections of the build, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to watch yet again. I really appreciate you dedicating 20 minutes at least of your week to watch a full video here. If you do like it, drop me a like, a comment on what you enjoyed about the build, subscribe if you're new here, I'd really love to have you along, and thank you all for watching again. Enjoy the tour.